Nora Calloway was not the kind of woman who made decisions slowly. She thought hard, she thought fast, and then she moved. That was how she had gotten through the academy at the top of her class. That was how she had survived 3 years of fieldwork on the edge of human space. And that was how, on a gray Tuesday morning in the capital city of New Geneva, she had walked into Colonel Dale Pruitt's office and told him she was volunteering for the Veil-Theory bonding mission. Pruitt had stared at her for a long time. He was a big man with a flat face and the kind of eyes that had seen too much war to be surprised by anything. But she had surprised him. "You understand what you're asking," he said. "I understand completely," she said. "You would be leaving Earth. Possibly forever. I know that. You would be married to an alien emperor. A 7-foot alien emperor who has 4 eyes and has never spoken more than 6 sentences to any human being at one time." "I've read the transcripts," she said. "He speaks very good English, actually." Pruitt leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "Calloway," he said, "you are 31 years old. You have a graduate degree in xenosociology, a citation for bravery at the outer threshold, and a habit of doing things that no one else would do because the math works out. Does the math work out here? Humanity needs the Veil-Theory war fleets," she said. "The Keth are getting bolder. The outer colonies are still rebuilding. We have maybe 4 years before the next major incursion, and when it comes, we need those ships. The Veil-Theory will not commit their war fleets without a formal alliance. Their law requires a bonded partner for the Emperor before he can command the fleets in defense of another species. There is no bonded partner. I am available. I am qualified. The math works out." Pruitt looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." She had been sure. She had stayed sure through 3 more meetings with Pruitt, through her sister Kara crying on the phone for 2 hours, through her old academy roommate Lou Hartley sitting across from her in a coffee shop and saying absolutely nothing, just looking at her with wide still eyes. She had stayed sure through the 6 weeks of protocol briefings, through the language preparation courses, through the long flight aboard a diplomatic vessel called the Covenant's Path, watching Earth grow small in the rear window and then disappear entirely. She had stayed sure right up until she was standing at the altar in the Grand Hall of the Veil-Theory Dominion and the Emperor was standing beside her. His name was Kael'Voth. She had read everything about him. She had studied his speeches, his political decisions, his military record, his documented behaviors in diplomatic settings. She had built a picture of him in her mind that was accurate and detailed and entirely two-dimensional, the way a photograph is accurate but does not breathe. He breathed. He was tall in a way that made the ceiling feel lower, and the gray scales of his skin caught the light of the hall's long amber lamps and held it. He had 4 eyes, 2 large ones at the front, dark and deep as still water, and 2 smaller ones near his temples that moved independently. His hands were folded in front of him with the patience of someone who had stood in important places for a very long time and had learned that patience was a kind of strength. He had looked at her when she walked in. Not the way a person looks at a political arrangement. The way a person looks at something they did not expect. She had filed that away. The ceremony was long and conducted mostly in Old Veil-Theory, a language she had been studying for 6 weeks and could now understand at about 70% accuracy, which was enough to follow the high priest's words and know when to speak her responses. She had practiced her phonetic lines until she could say them in her sleep. She said them clearly, without stumbling. When it was her turn to listen to the Emperor speak his vows, he said them in English. She had not expected that. It was not in the briefing documents. She kept her face still and did not show that she was surprised, but she was. When it was done, the hall was silent for a moment. The 3 sons of the Veil-Theory home system were setting through the high windows, filling the room with orange and gold. The Emperor turned to look at her, and she looked back at him. "You are afraid of nothing," he said. His voice was low and carried a rumble underneath it, like thunder that was still far away. "That is not true," she said. "Then you hide it very well." "Yes," she said. "I do." He studied her face. His secondary eyes, the small ones at his temples, were very still, which she would later learn meant he was paying close attention. Then he did something she had not read about in any briefing document. He smiled. It was not a human smile. It used different muscles and showed more teeth and was somewhat alarming the first time you saw it. But it was a smile, and it was real, and it was meant for her. Something moved in her chest. A small shift, quiet as a door opening into a room she had not known was there. She chose not to look at it yet. There was too much else to manage. The reception that followed lasted 4 hours. She was introduced to 47 members of the Veiltheri nobility, all of whose names she had memorized from the briefing files. She remembered all of them. She spoke correctly and carefully and with the right level of formality for each rank, which she had also studied. Several of the nobles seemed surprised that she knew the proper forms of address. She noted their surprise and said nothing about it. At one point, she was standing near a window looking out at the gardens below when a small quick figure appeared at her elbow. It was her new attendant, a Veiltheri named Voss, who was about 4.5 feet tall, had bright green frills behind their ears, and communicated through a mixture of clicks, color shifts, and occasional very quiet spoken words. Voss looked up at her. Their frills shifted to a pale yellow, which Nora did not yet know the meaning of. "You did well," Voss said, in their small voice. "Thank you," Nora said. "Is the yellow a positive thing?" Voss's frills flickered rapidly. This, she would later learn, was laughter. "You already noticed the colors," Voss said. "Good." Later, when the reception was over and she had been shown to her suite in the eastern wing, she stood in the center of the large quiet room and took a breath. The room was beautiful. The walls were a deep blue-gray and slightly warm to the touch, alive the way the whole palace was alive. There was a wide window that looked out over the gardens. There was a desk and a reading chair and a bed that was wide enough to sleep 4 humans comfortably. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. She thought about what she had done. She thought about Earth, which was very far away. She thought about Kara and Lou and Colonel Pruitt and the clean, logical calculation that had brought her here. Then she thought about the Emperor's smile, which had not been in any of the briefing documents. She took out her notebook and opened it to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote 2 words, insufficient data. Then she closed the notebook, lay down on the wide bed, and made herself sleep. Outside, the last of the 3 suns finished setting, and the first stars of the Veiltheri night came out, thick and close and nothing like the stars above Oregon, and the palace breathed softly around her like something that was glad she had arrived. The eastern wing of the Veiltheri palace had 43 rooms and 3 small inner gardens and a library that had been collecting books for 600 years. Nora found the library on her second day. She did not leave it for 7 hours. Voss found her there at dusk, surrounded by open volumes, a cup of Veiltheri tea gone cold at her elbow, her notebook full of cramped careful handwriting. "The evening meal will be served in 1 hour," Voss said. Their frills were a soft orange, which Nora had by now identified as mild concern. "I'll be there," Nora said, without looking up. "You have been in here since morning." "I know. This archive has the complete voting records of the Dominion Council going back 200 years. Do you know how rare that is? On Earth those records are scattered across 4 different databases and 3 of them require special clearance." She finally looked up. "Has anyone ever organized this by policy area?" Voss stared at her. Their frills went pale yellow, the laughter color. "No," they said. "No one has ever wanted to." "I want to," Nora said. "But that can wait. Tell me about the evening meal. Who will be there? What is the correct seating protocol? Is there anything I should know about food that will be offered that I should not eat for biological reasons?" Voss sat down across from her and answered every question, and Nora wrote down everything, and by the time they left the library she was as prepared as she could be for an event she had had no preparation documents for. The evening meals of the Veiltheri court were formal and followed very precise rules about who sat where and who spoke when and what topics were appropriate for what stage of the meal. Nora had not known any of this the night before, but she had spent part of the afternoon reading a court etiquette manual from the library, and she moved through the dinner without making a single visible mistake. Lord Sveith of the first house sat across from her. He was old by Veiltheri standards, with darker scales and eyes that had the quality of someone who had decided long ago that they were the most important person in any room they entered. He spent the first course talking over her to the noble on her left. He spent the second course making remarks to his neighbor about human cognitive limitations. He did not lower his voice very much. Nora heard every word. She waited until the third course, which was the point in the meal where open discussion was permitted. Then she asked a question, addressed to the table at large, about the trade routes along the Veiltheri outer belt. Specifically, about why the tariff structure on processed tellurium had not been updated in 40 years despite significant changes in production costs. The table got quiet. Nora had spent 2 hours that afternoon reading trade records. She had found 6 separate inconsistencies that were, as far as she could tell, costing the Dominion a significant amount of money every year for no good reason. She presented 3 of them now, clearly, with the specific numbers, in Old Veiltheri. Lord Sveith stared at her. His frills, which were very large, went a deep flat red. Nora looked at him pleasantly. "I would be very interested in your perspective on the tellurium issue, my lord," she said. "Given that your house holds 3 of the affected mining licenses." The silence lasted a long time. The Emperor, sitting at the head of the table, said nothing at all through this. His face was still and his large eyes were calm and she could not read him at all. After dinner, when the court had drifted apart into smaller groups, he found her standing near one of the tall windows. "You learned Old Veiltheri in 4 days," he said. 3.5, she said. Voss helped. "You made Lord Sveith look foolish in front of his peers." "He made himself look foolish. I only asked a question. It was a very specific question. I read the trade records this afternoon. The inconsistencies were not difficult to find. Someone should have found them a long time ago." The Emperor was quiet for a moment. His secondary eyes closed slowly. She had started to understand that this meant he was doing something like taking a slow breath. "You are going to be a great deal of work," he said. "Probably," she said. She paused. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "The Dominion has had enough empresses who were not." She looked at him. He looked at her. She thought about the smile from the ceremony, the one that was not in any briefing document. She thought about what he had just said, which sounded very much like a compliment wrapped inside a complaint. "I'll try not to cause too much trouble," she said. "I do not believe that," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite humor but was close to it. The days that followed were full. Nora threw herself into learning the Dominion the way she threw herself into everything, completely, with no part of her attention held back. She met with trade ministers and asked questions that made them nervous. She sat in on 3 council sessions and took 12 pages of notes. She walked every wing of the palace until she could navigate it without thinking, and she learned the names of every attendant and guard she encountered, because she believed that names mattered and that people who were not used to being remembered deserved to be. She also spent time with Voss, who was proving to be one of the most interesting people she had met in years. Voss had worked in the palace for 15 years and knew everything about everyone and had opinions about all of it, delivered in their small dry voice with the frills shifting through colors that Nora was getting faster at reading. "You like it here," Voss said one morning, about 2 weeks in. It was not a question. Nora looked up from her reading. She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "I do. Even though you came for political reasons." "I came for political reasons," she said. "The place itself is more than I expected." Voss's frills went a soft warm color that Nora had not learned yet. "What color is that?" she asked. Voss seemed to consider whether to answer. "Contentment," they said finally. "It is the color of contentment." Nora nodded and went back to her reading. Outside the library window, one of the inner gardens was filling with morning light, and the plants, which were nothing like any plant on Earth, were turning toward it the way all living things turn toward warmth. She was still telling herself she was here for the Alliance. She was still telling herself it was a calculation. But the notebook on the desk beside her had a lot of new pages filled in, and very few of them were about politics. Most of them were observations. Small things. The way the palace breathed at night. The way Voss's frills went yellow when something was funny. The way the Emperor said very few words but made each one count. She was a scientist by training. She knew what it meant when you kept collecting data on a subject. She closed the notebook. She opened a new trade file. She did not think about it any further. But the page was there, and the words were written, and the door that had opened in her chest on the first day of the ceremony had not closed again. It was 4 months into the marriage before Nora found the room. She had not been looking for it. She had been looking for the Eastern Archive, which Voss had described as being down the third corridor past the old gallery. She had counted 3 corridors and turned and found herself in a part of the palace she did not recognize. The walls here were darker and older and smelled like stone that had been warm for a very long time. The lamps were smaller. The ceilings were lower. She walked carefully, not wanting to disturb anything. Most of the doors were closed and she did not try them. One door, near the end of the corridor, was open a little. She could see light inside, amber and low. She knocked. The door swung further open. The room was small. Smaller than her reading room, smaller than most of the rooms in the palace. The floor was bare and smooth and the emperor was sitting on it, cross-legged, in the center of the space. His armor was on a stand in the far corner. Without it he looked different. Still large. Still entirely himself. But somehow also just a person sitting on a floor, which was not a thing she had imagined the Emperor of the Veiltheri Dominion doing. Around him, in careful rows, were small objects. A piece of folded parchment with a drawing on it. A carved figure of a 6-legged animal about the size of her fist. A strip of woven cloth with a pattern she did not recognize. A small piece of metal bent into a shape that might have been a ring, once. Other things she could not identify from where she stood. He looked up. His large eyes were calm. His secondary eyes were open and still. She expected him to tell her she was in the wrong place. She expected formality, distance, the careful politeness that was their usual register with each other. He said, "My daughter made that drawing. She died of the lung sickness 14 years ago. She was 6. Nora went very still in the doorway. "I come here on the anniversary of her death," he said. "It was yesterday. I came late." He paused. "I do not usually have company. I took a wrong turn," she said. "I was looking for the Eastern Archive. I can go." "You can stay," he said. "If you want." She stayed. She sat down on the floor, across from him, leaving space between them. The floor was smooth and cool. The room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like a place that had been made for being quiet in. She did not say anything for a long time. She was good at silence when silence was the right thing. She had learned early that some moments asked you to speak and some moments asked you to simply be present, and that confusing the two could do real damage. After a while, she said, "What was her name?" "Ela," he said. "It means morning light in the old tongue. That is a good name. She was a good person." He was quiet for a moment. "She would have been a better ruler than me. She had your habit of asking inconvenient questions." Nora looked at him. He was looking at the drawing. It was a child's drawing, done in bright unsteady lines. She could make out something with wings, and something that might have been a sun, and 2 figures standing together that were probably people. Did she know what she wanted to do? Nora asked. When she was older. She wanted to be an explorer, he said. She talked about the unmapped systems past the outer belt. She had a list of names she wanted to give to new stars. He paused again. She showed it to me once. She had already thought of 40 names. She was 5 at the time. Nora said nothing. She looked at the drawing and thought about a 5-year-old with a list of 40 star names, and she felt something in her chest that she did not try to name. "I am sorry," she said. "Losing a child is the hardest thing." "Yes," he said simply. The room was quiet again. Outside, somewhere distant in the palace, she could hear the soft sound of the building breathing. It was something she had gotten used to and had come to find comforting. "I came here knowing exactly what it was," she said, after a while. She was not entirely sure why she was saying it, except that the room felt like a place where honest things belonged. A political arrangement. A calculation. Humanity needed something and I could provide it. I told myself that was the whole reason. He looked at her then. His 4 eyes were all open, all still. "I know," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I know you know," she said. "I am not going to pretend it was something else. I appreciate that, he said. But, she said, and then she stopped and thought about how to say the next part. I was not prepared for you to be an interesting person. I had done a great deal of research and I had a very complete picture of the Emperor of the Veiltheri Dominion. And that picture was accurate as far as it went. But it did not go far enough. He was still looking at her. She looked back at him. You sat on the floor with me, he said. Yes. You did not leave when I told you about Ela. Why would I leave? He did not answer that. But his secondary eyes closed slowly and opened again. The gesture she had learned meant something like a sigh, except not a sad one. The people of my court, he said, do not know how to be around grief. They know how to manage it. How to acknowledge it correctly and then move past it. They do not know how to simply sit in the same room with it. My mother died when I was 19, Nora said. My sister and I sat in her room for 2 days after. We did not talk much. We just stayed. She looked at the objects arranged on the floor. I think staying is sometimes the most important thing you can do. The Emperor looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached forward and very gently adjusted the position of the carved six-legged figure, moving it a fraction of an inch, the way you move something when you want your hands to have something careful to do. She made that too, he said. She carved it herself. She was 4. She was talented. She was extraordinary, he said. And there was so much in his voice when he said it. Not performance, not the dignity of an emperor presenting grief correctly. Just a father, missing his child. Nora sat with him for another hour. They talked a little and were quiet a lot, and it was not awkward, which surprised her. When she finally got up to leave, her legs were stiff from the floor and the amber lamps had dimmed further. Thank you, he said. For staying. Thank you for letting me, she said. She walked back through the dark corridor and then through the brighter parts of the palace and back to her own rooms. She sat on her bed for a while and looked at the ceiling. She opened her notebook. She turned to the page she had labeled insufficient data, which was now several pages long. She read through what she had written over the past 4 months. The small observations. The things he had said. The things Voss had told her. The things she had noticed herself, not as a diplomat or a xenosociologist but just as a person paying attention to another person. At the bottom of the last page she wrote one more line. Then she closed the notebook and put it down. She did not look at what she had written again that night. But it was there, and she knew it was there, and she stopped trying to pretend that the door in her chest had not opened further. The alarm came at 3 in the morning. Nora was already awake. She had been awake since 2, sitting at her desk with the trade route data from the outer threshold spread across 3 screens. Something in the numbers had been pulling at her for 3 weeks. A pattern in the shipping delays. Minor course changes in several unmapped patrol zones. Supply irregularities in 4 mining colonies near the belt. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together, she was starting to think it told a story, and she did not like the story it was telling. When the alarm sounded, she was already dressed. She picked up her notebook and walked to the war room. She was the 3rd person there. The first 2 were communications officers running on adrenaline, their frills flat and red. The tactical screens were lighting up one by one, each new point of contact a small cold fact. The Keth had come out of dark space at the edge of the outer belt in numbers that made the standard patrol projections look like a child's drawing. They had hit the first mining outpost at 2:47 in the morning. They had hit 3 more by the time Nora walked into the war room. Admiral Veth arrived 7 minutes later, armored and grim. Kael'Voth arrived 2 minutes after that. The Emperor looked at the screens. He looked at Nora. She already had her notebook open. They are hitting the tellurium deposits first, she said. All 4 initial strikes are on facilities with high tellurium output. Without refined tellurium we cannot manufacture the drive cores for the war fleets. They know that. They are not here to take territory. They are here to take away our ability to fight back. This is not a raid. This is the beginning of a campaign. The room was quiet for a moment. Admiral Veth said, "How long have you been modeling this?" 3 weeks, she said. I filed a report. I believe it was placed in the secondary review queue. Veth turned to look at his communications officer. The officer looked at the floor. The Emperor said, in a very quiet voice, "Get it out of the secondary review queue." What followed was the longest and most difficult 37 hours of Nora's life. She would try to reconstruct it later and find that it existed in her memory not as a continuous story but as a series of moments, each one sharp and clear, with the spaces between them lost. She remembered standing at the main tactical screen with a marker and drawing lines between the hit sites, showing Veth the pattern of the Keth advance. He had argued with her at first, the way experienced commanders argue with civilians who think they understand war. She had not argued back. She had simply shown him the math, step by step, until he stopped arguing and started listening. She remembered coordinating the evacuation of the civilian workers on the 4 mining colonies, working 3 communication channels at once, her voice steady, her hands moving constantly between screens. She had never managed an evacuation before. She did it by thinking about each decision as a problem with a solution rather than a crisis with no answer. She remembered negotiating an emergency supply corridor through the neutral corridor systems, which required trade concessions she did not technically have the authority to offer. She offered them anyway and sent a message to the diplomatic office on Earth explaining what she had done and why, and asking them to make it official before anyone noticed it was not. She remembered at hour 22 telling a senior council member, calmly and with complete respect, that his suggested tactical response would result in the loss of 2 Warfleet divisions and accomplish nothing strategically useful, and that if he would like to argue about it she was available at a time when she was not currently trying to prevent a war. She remembered Veth, at hour 29, looking at her across the tactical table with an expression she had not seen on a Veiltheri face before. She would later ask Voss what it meant. Voss told her it was the look of someone revising a very firm opinion. At hour 29 she stepped out of the war room for 3 minutes to drink water and look at a wall. The corridor was empty and quiet and the palace was breathing around her, the deep slow warmth of it, and she stood still and let herself exist for a moment without doing anything. She heard footsteps and turned. Kael'Voth came to stand beside her. "You should rest," he said. "You have not rested either," she said. "I am the Emperor." "I am the Empress," she said. "Apparently that means something here." He did not answer that. She drank her water. He stood beside her in the quiet corridor. "You have saved thousands of lives today," he said. "My people's lives. I want you to understand that I know that." She had been awake for 29 hours. She had been operating on calculation and water and the particular sharpness that comes with having no time to be tired. She had no walls left for things that were not tactical decisions. Her eyes stung. "Do not be kind to me right now," she said. "I have 8 more hours of this." He said nothing. He reached out and put one large hand on her shoulder, very gently. Not a dramatic gesture. Not the Emperor reassuring a valuable asset. Just a person putting a hand on someone's shoulder, the way you do when you want them to know that you see them. He held it there for a moment. Then he went back into the war room. Nora drank the rest of her water. She looked at the wall. She breathed. Then she followed him in. The Keth were driven back from the outer belt threshold at hour 37. The tellurium deposits were intact. 3 of the 4 mining colonies had been fully evacuated before the Keth reached them. The 4th had partial losses that were, by every historical measure of a Keth incursion, astonishingly low. The war fleets were undamaged. The drive core manufacturing lines would be running again within 6 days. The emergency supply corridor Nora had negotiated was already being formalized by the diplomatic office on Earth, who had apparently decided that asking no questions was the right response. 3 separate admirals filed individual reports with the Council. All 3 noted that the opening defense had been managed with an effectiveness that had no precedent in Dominion history. None of the 3 reports mentioned that the human Empress had run most of it from a standing position with a water cup and a notebook. Voss found Nora in her rooms 2 hours after the all-clear, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, her notebook open in her lap, writing nothing. "Are you all right?" Voss asked. "Yes," Nora said. "I am very tired." "You should sleep." "I know." She did not move. Voss sat down on the floor beside her, which Nora had not expected. They sat together in the quiet room for a while, and the palace breathed around them. "The court is talking," Voss said finally. What are they saying? Voss's frills went a color Nora had never seen before. They are saying, Voss said, quietly, that the Dominion is very lucky. Nora looked at the ceiling. She thought about a hand on her shoulder in a corridor. She thought about a drawing made by a 6-year-old named Ela. She thought about a smile that had not been in any briefing document. So am I, she said. She closed the notebook. She got up off the floor. She went to sleep. Spring came to the Veiltheri Dominion as something that was not quite rain but fell like it, warm and silver, from clouds the color of old iron. It touched the garden leaves and made them shine, and it fell on the high balconies of the eastern wing in soft quiet curtains. Nora stood on her balcony and let it fall on her face and thought about the message from Colonel Pruitt. He had used careful language. He was always careful with language, Pruitt, in the way that people are careful when they are trying to say something without saying it. The message had been 3 paragraphs of professional courtesy and 1 sentence at the end that was the real point. The diplomatic team was ready to begin the formalization process, and they wanted to know her intentions. Her intentions. As though she were a weather pattern that needed to be charted. She had read the message 4 times. Then she had come out to the balcony and she had been standing there for 20 minutes, and the silverfall was in her hair and on her shoulders, and she was thinking. She heard the door behind her open. You are standing in the silverfall without a coat, Kael'Voth said. I grew up in Oregon, she said. This is good weather. He came to stand beside her at the railing. Without his formal court armor, he wore what she had come to understand was his working dress, a long deep blue garment that left his arms free, practical and plain. The silverfall beaded on his scales and caught the light of the cloud-covered suns. You received a message from your home government, he said. It was not a question. She had learned that he often said things as statements that other people would say as questions, not because he was assuming the answer but because he was offering her the space to fill it. Yes, she said. They want to know if you are coming back. Yes. He looked out at the garden. Below them, the silverfall made small sounds against the broad flat leaves of the Veiltheri plants, which she had learned the names of over the past months, all 42 species visible from this window. I should tell you something, he said. Under Veiltheri law, a bonded partnership is a choice, not a contract. It holds only as long as both people want it to hold. If you wish to return to Earth, the alliance remains. I will not keep you here by obligation. That is not who I am. I know, she said. I also want you to know, he said, and then he stopped. This was unusual. He did not usually stop in the middle of sentences. I want you to know that you are the first person in 14 years who has sat on the floor of that room with me. Nora looked out at the garden. The silverfall was slowing, the way it always did in the late morning. She thought about the conversation she had needed to have with herself for the past several weeks. She had been putting it off with work, the way she put off many things she was not ready for, filling the space with trade files and council reports and conversations with Voss. But work had limits, and truth had a way of being patient. She knew what she was going to say. She had known for a while. She had just needed to stop being afraid of how clearly she knew it. The first time I came here, she said, I told myself a story. The story was that I was a logical person making a logical choice. Humanity needed something. I could provide it. The math worked out. That was the story. He listened without speaking. That story was true, she said. As far as it went. But I have been thinking about why I was so sure, so quickly, when other qualified people were not. Why I walked into Pruitt's office that Tuesday morning and did not hesitate. And I think the real answer is not as clean as I wanted it to be. What is the real answer? He asked. She thought about Oregon. She thought about the academy, the years of working harder than anyone around her because she needed to be the best in the room. She thought about the feeling she had always had, even in the best moments of her career, that she was slightly too large for the spaces she was being asked to occupy. That the ceilings were always a little too low. I wanted to matter, she said. Not in the way where people say nice things about you. In the way where what you do is real and what you are is needed and the work is actually worth doing. I wanted to be somewhere that asked something real of me. She paused. I have been in a lot of rooms with low ceilings. The ceilings here are very high, he said. Yes, she said. I noticed. A bird called from the garden below. The long dropping note that Voss had told her meant the silverfall was about to stop. I am not going back, she said. She felt him go still beside her. Not tense. Still. The way things go still when they are waiting to believe something. I want you to understand why, she said. Not because of the alliance. Not because of the law. Not because of anything that was in the original calculation. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. I am staying because this place is real and the work here is real. Because Voss makes terrible jokes and I have started making them back. Because I know all 42 species of plant in this garden and I still have not finished the library. Because 3 separate admirals wrote reports about the Keth defense and none of them gave me credit and I find that genuinely funny. He did not speak. His secondary eyes were open and very still. And because, she said, more slowly, a person I had not finished understanding sat on a floor and told me his daughter's name. And I would like to keep understanding him. If he is willing. The silverfall stopped. The garden below was suddenly brighter, the light coming through the breaking clouds in long pale lines, and it touched the plants and the stones and the pale railing of the balcony, and it touched Kael'vatha's face, and he was looking at her with something open in his expression that she had not seen there before. Not the Emperor. Just the person. Ela would have liked you, he said. Enormously. Something in Nora's chest settled into place. Not with drama. Not with the noise of something breaking open. Just a quiet resolution, clean and final, like the last piece of a very long calculation arriving at the right answer. Tell me more about her, she said. He did. He told her about the star name list and the 6-legged animal Ela had insisted on keeping as a pet despite every reasonable objection. He told her about the morning light her daughter had been named for, the particular color of the sky on the day she was born, pink and gold above the eastern mountains. He told her small stories and large ones, and Nora listened to all of them, and the palace breathed around them both, and the 3 suns came out one by one above the garden. She had come to the Veiltheri dominion with a plan. The plan had been logical and clean and well-researched and had carried her here safely, which was what plans were for. But the best things, she thought, as the last sun cleared the clouds and turned the whole garden gold, were the ones that happened after the plan was done. The ones you did not research. The ones that found you because you had been brave enough to put yourself somewhere real. She was in the right place. She was sure of it. Not with the certainty of a calculation, but with something older and quieter and stronger. She leaned on the railing. He leaned on it beside her. Below them, the garden moved in the morning wind. They stayed there for a long time.